We are live on Facebook.
Great.
Okay. So now we're going to come back to this. There we are. All right. So everyone, welcome to another episode of the Aware Athlete Show. I'm your host, Scott Forrester, and we will be talking today with a special guest. I'm glad she could be here. And today's show will concern itself with how and why art imitates life and how to be your own hero, how to be the hero of your own story. Let me say it that way. And that's really, to me, that's a very, very important subject. So today we're very pleased to have with us Cristen Iris. Cristen is a developmental and substantive editor and public speaker, and also a writer. She describes herself as a conscious capitalist and works on books about health and fitness, social justice and equality, disability advocacy, and self and professional improvement. Cristen is also the editor I worked most closely with to develop my own book, The Aware Athlete. So Cristen, thank you for being here today.
I'm delighted.
Yeah, so you have a very unique story. Growing up in a household where TV was not emphasized, that's rather rare anymore. And can you tell us something about your upbringing and how your upbringing caused you to cultivate your love of reading and books?
Sure. Yeah, it wasn't even that TV was de-emphasized. We didn't even have a television until I was 17. So
Wow.
Yeah, no television. So I was the weird kid, but in more ways than one. But it was great because my parents are both avid readers. So we had no television, but we had hundreds of books. My dad, in fact, forever ago, you could subscribe to get a book a month, I think it was from the Smithsonian or something. And they would send these beautiful leather-bound books. And so we'd get those once a month. My dad taught me how to properly break in a book, cracking the spine and doing all the things. So it was really an event when the book of the month came. But what we did was we would gather around in the living room when I guess most families after dinner would go watch TV. We would gather around and my parents would read aloud to all of us. And then as we got older and learned to read, we would start reading chapters, kind of pass it around. So it was really fun because it was a mix of obviously that family time, but it was kind of a mix of education and theater, because when you're reading a book aloud as a entertainment type of thing, you take on these personalities and you become somebody else that you're not. And I think it really helped teach me confidence and the love of words and how reading is sometimes seen kind of as a solitary sport, but really it can be a team sport when we're all reading the same thing and discussing something around the same topic.
Right. So as a preteen, you began to make your first attempt to write a novel, that would be a little bit over my head. But in your situation as you grew up, you read so many books that you were probably absorbing structure and things that I perhaps wasn't. But how did that first attempt to write a novel go when you really didn't have that much life experience?
Yeah, so I think it never occurred to me to be afraid of the process. I think I just naturally figured I could do this because of like what you said. But so it came about because I had read this trilogy called Into the Night, and it was about a group of young people in World War II, and they were, freedom fighters. And so I really admired this group of people. And I think like we do when we read, we see ourselves in that hero. We live vicariously through them. So I wanted to write something like that. So I got about 3 chapters in, and I realized that at best it was derivative and at worst it was plagiarized. And so I abandoned the whole process because I realized that this was not a unique piece of art in and of itself. So my first attempt at writing anything long form was a failure in some ways, but I think looking back, that was really the moment that the editor was born, because I was able to step out of myself and go, that's not good, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So you did that as a writer, but stepping out of yourself is a whole subject in itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
So as a growing up, did you prefer fiction or nonfiction?
You know, it was a mix of both that I read, but I've always been pulled more toward nonfiction. I was the kid who read the dictionary. My favorite thing was to read the Encyclopedia Britannicas. And so, yeah, I think just that love of learning and information and seeing how all these different things, you know, you can take art and science and business, and it's amazing how all of these things are really just interconnected, and there's metaphors that you can take from one and use in the other.
Yeah. I when I was a kid, I think I remember it was a little adventure just walking to the library. You know, we were allowed to walk the neighborhood a little bit more than kids are now, maybe. And so I'd walk off there and then I'd look in the science fiction section, which fascinated me. And so you can actually get to live in another world for a while.
Yeah.
And but then again, when I walk into a bookstore now, I find that what I'm really doing is I'm seeing a whole world of other people's stories. And so it's really a way to expand your mind through other people's eyes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think fiction in a lot of ways is undervalued by especially people who gravitate toward nonfiction, because fiction authors can teach us so much because it's not so in your face. You know, a nonfiction author is really putting forward something that can be challenging to people in some ways, where a fiction author can weave in those life lessons and that's to me the crossover where art can meet life in writing is
Right.
when you can do that.
Yeah. It's interesting when you get to speak in metaphors and people might even say, well, what does that mean? And that might be what you want them to say.
Exactly.
So we all have a story. And I've some people will say, you know, when you're done with a certain aspect of your life, because you know that you now have a good story in that area.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I got that particularly from Mark Allen, who was a 6-time world Ironman champion, and talking about how do you know when to walk away? Well, when your story is finished, when you have a good story.
Right.
So we're not just talking about writing things because, like I say, you're always reading other people's stories. Those are real, heartfelt insights into other people.
Yeah.
So whether we write them or not, we have stories.
Right.
Yeah. So let's get into let me ask you now about being the hero of your own story. That's what Mark Allen was saying, because, well, you have to do that if you're going to finish up a certain part of your story. You have to finish it.
Right.
It has to have come to a meaningful, interesting story in that aspect of your life. So now I'm going to ask you a very important question. I think it's important for all of us. I think we've all asked it. There are a lot of definitions to this too. What is a hero?
To me, a hero is somebody who is willing to take on a challenge that maybe they didn't even know that they needed to do. You know, just so many times in life we're forced into a situation or an opportunity presents itself that we had never considered before, that we go, that's worth pursuing. So first of all, you have to be able to recognize and be aware of what's going on and those opportunities. And then the second thing is that there has to be an absolute commitment to the goal. So the prize has to be worth either really kind of that worth dying for thing, whether that's dying of embarrassment or humiliation if you fail, or, you know, but what's at stake has to be really strong. And then it's just a matter of taking the steps every day to get to that thing and not allowing yourself the freedom to fail and embarrass yourself and be depressed and have all of the icky stuff. I think too often we think of heroes as, you know, the cape with the, you know, the fists on your hips and everything is great and you're totally in control. And I think most people, the more I get to know people who have done anything that is out of the ordinary, the more I realize that all of us are struggling one day at a time and just embracing that. So yeah, it's a complicated answer, but I think you just have to embrace everything that's thrown at you and have the understanding and the confidence in yourself that you have the capacity to overcome. It's just a matter of figuring out how and who you need help from.
Yeah. So you touched on several things there.
Yeah.
They're all really critical. So the hero then is someone, I know Joseph Campbell talked a lot about this, but the hero is someone who either starts out with or develops the commitment to put everything on the line.
Yep.
That's what we want to read about. That's when because it's so essential to living life fully. Mm-hmm. That commitment. Recently, someone said, you reach a point in your life where the pain of being killed for what you believe in mm-hmm. is less than coming to the end and saying, I didn't stand up for what I believed in.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So somewhere along the line, I guess that's what I preferred about the Marvel superheroes as I was growing up, that they all had these flaws.
Yeah.
And these things they had to overcome.
Yeah.
Pretty human. So that's really critical to understand the struggle and the need for commitment. And mm-hmm. you raised another thing there. You said that really all human beings. I used to think I was the only one that had insecurities, but I realized that's not the truth.
Right.
We all have them. Some of us hide them. Some of us let them be seen, or some of us appear to not have them because we run towards our fears instead of, you know, it's like, oh, I'm scared to death, but I'm going to do it. I meet personalities like that I really, really respect.
Yeah.
I think we all be that way a little bit.
That reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Winston Churchill, and that is that courage is going from failure to failure without a lack of enthusiasm, or without losing enthusiasm, or something like that.
Right.
Love that. Because, yeah, I mean, truly life is just one opportunity for failure after another. And you can be paralyzed by that, or you can just lean into it and see what happens.
Right. Right. So it's, we're striving for something that's important to us. And that actually is a very positive thing. And we need to embrace positivity, but we need to embrace and go into the darkness and the negativity too.
Right.
Yeah. So
yeah.
How will we really overcome something if we don't take a good look at it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things that I'm in general a very positive person, and I do think you have to have a positive outlook if you're going to get anything done. Otherwise, you know, you'll just crumple up and shrivel up and die. But one of the things that I tell clients and tell people is think negative. And what I mean is think negative first, because that's a strategy for success. If you think negative and go, okay, what are my weaknesses? You know, how could I screw up this endeavor? Where could this fall down on my end? What are the weaknesses and I'm talking about, you know, character flaws and those parts of our personalities that can hold us back. And then, okay, then looking at it structurally, you know, if it's a business person or a writer or an athlete, I mean, really just everybody has some kind of a structure to what they're doing, is say, okay, what are the potential failure points in my processes and in my structure? And then also just, you know, assessing risk from all sides. If you think negative first, that is so empowering, because now you know what you're up against and you can say, okay, great. I can mitigate this risk by doing this. I can mitigate this risk by doing that. And I think that's essentially what successful people do. And if you are, you know, talking about the hero's journey, a lot of it is just figuring out ways to overcome the things that would paralyze somebody who's not as flexible of a thinker.
Yeah. So I want to say something we might not go into immediately, but then there's the danger of thinking of overwhelming yourself with the obstacles. But,
right.
Yeah. So, but first I would like to say, I feel that you're pretty successful in actualizing the things that are important to you, and doing a pretty good job of serving the world through writing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So what have been some of your struggles? What have been some of the things that you've surmounted on that journey?
You know, here's something that surprised me. I've always been a very independent person. So I just kind of do my thing in the way that I see fit. And sometimes I look terrible in the beginning, whatever. That doesn't faze me too much. I know that that's part of my process. But a few years ago, my husband and I decided to sell our house. We had a pretty big house, big yard, trees, garden, the whole thing. Sell the house, buy an RV, and, you know, downsize and be more flexible and all that. So one of the things, though, that I realized about myself in that process as I was packing up my office was, you know, when you move into an RV, there's not a lot of space. We have like 274 square feet that we live in and I work in. So I had to pack up all my books. I had to pack up my, you know, my certificates, my awards, the things I had hanging on the wall. And as I was packing up those things, I had this really weird thing that I was kind of almost overwhelmed with this emotion of exposure and inadequacy. And I realized that things that I had around me, you know, all the books on my shelves and those certificates were there to stroke my ego and tell me that I was okay. And if nobody saw those things, you know, in the videos I was recording or whatever, well, then how would they know that I'm smart? How would they know that I've done all this stuff? Mm-hmm. And that was really a moment of really deep embarrassment that I was so insecure when I had this persona of being secure. But I think that was one of the best things that could ever have happened to me, because by stripping away all of those extra things that we lean on, whether it's clothes, whether it's, you know, the nice house that we live in, when you strip away all that stuff and you just have to stand as who you are and hold your own, then you know who you are and where you have to go from there and what you need to do. So I does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. So yeah, it's you have to simplify a lot to move it small. I'm speaking to you from a motorhome right now, so
I love that we have that in common.
we're actually kind of outgrowing it. My wife needs enough equipment to make jewelry, and I do certain things too. So, yeah, it's interesting, and I have a lot of clothes at home, but I haven't worn them for 5 years because they're in storage. Mm-hmm. So I guess I didn't need them for the lifestyle I'm having now. Now I don't have all the winter clothes I'd need for, the 0 degrees to be outside, but that wouldn't take too much.
But I think that that's, you know, if somebody wants to embark, like talking about the hero's journey, if somebody really wants to embark on the hero's journey, and really what I talk about is like write your future. It's a very purposeful thing that you have to do. An athlete, whether it's a professional athlete or somebody who aspires to professional athletics, or a competitive age group athlete, they have to have this thing that they go, this is what I want to do. And life has to become very simple if you're going to succeed in one area or another. So I think that minimalism and that kind of adopting that kind of a lifestyle is a fantastic way to kind of test yourself. Do you really want to embark on a hero's journey? Because some people, when it comes right down to it, they're not ready, or they really don't want to. And I'm not saying that everybody has to become a minimalist and sell their house and move into an RV or a tiny house, yeah. But what you're willing to let go of and how simple you're willing to make your life, I think can be a litmus test for how well you're going to do and how serious you are about embarking on a hero's journey. I think that can sound kind of extreme, but just the people that I see and I watch who have done big things, the types of things that I want to do, man, in some ways they are the most boring people ever, but they're the most dynamic people and the biggest difference makers in the world.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. So how are they boring?
I think they're boring in that, you know, they're not always out there going to clubs and going to parties, and they don't have huge groups of friends, and they're not just flitting from this to that and have 10 different activities that they do. They pick the 1 or 2 things that are important to them, and they find a way to integrate, you know, if it's a few things, they find a way to integrate those things so that everything that they're doing is in one direction. And they say no a lot, because if this activity or, you know, is going to distract them from what they feel is their purpose in life, their mission, then they say, you know what, that would be great. I might even be good at that, but I'm going to say no to that so I can funnel that, my time, my finances, all of my resources in one direction that is going to be the most powerful. So like what you said, at the end of that particular phase of your journey or your life, you can look back and go, yeah, you know what?
Yeah.
All in all, I did everything I could to do this thing. And I can be proud of my effort, regardless of whether, you know, and it's letting go of results, you know, it's just a matter of taking responsibility for the effort in and of itself.
All right, Cristen, that's awesome. I really appreciate your comment on that. So I think you've already answered this, but when you go to negativity first, how would you prevent your negative assessments from overwhelming you? Again, I think you've already answered that, but just to revisit it.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I never thought about it as being able to be overwhelmed. And maybe that's because I came to that late enough in my life that I had the maturity and the confidence in myself to know that as long as I knew what the obstacles were, I could overcome them. But I don't know the answer to that, Scott, because you're right, because people are going to come to this at different phases. I think if you're younger and you have less experience, you're probably more apt to get sucked into a dark space. And I think maybe part of that is, maybe the answer to the question is, learn how to research and find the tools that you need and understand that you don't have to have all the answers. You just need to know where to start the search. And then I think that community and network are just so critical. Surround yourself with people who like and appreciate you and are moving on the same path in the same direction as you, because you are going to need those people. So when you feel weak, you can turn to your network for that support, and they can say, oh, I know it looks bad, but did you know about this resource? Or I see this in you that's going to help you overcome that weakness.
Yeah. Okay, so a network of support is really helpful. And I did ask you kind of a simplistic question that has a complex answer because it depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah.
And when you're talking to them. So I know that a lot of our listeners could have this question, and that is, I know people who are like you, have been kind of on a path since they were children, and it's sort of a straight path. I mean, you were always interested in books, and you've done very well along that path. So you talked about your mission and your purpose and focus. What do you say to people that are just not sure? Now, this is another simplistic question because it depends on the people. But there's a lot of people out there that just don't know what their purpose is. So what do you say to that?
Those are my favorite people to talk to, because actually it's so weird that what I'm doing now ties in so much to my upbringing. But I was never one of those people who knew what I wanted to do when I grew up. I have always been really interested in a lot of things. And so I didn't know. I graduated from high school very early, and I started college immediately. And I was bored, and I I didn't fit. So I dropped out after the first semester, and I did fine, but it was just whatever. And then I kind of went on with life. And it wasn't until I was in my later 30s that I actually went back to school and got my degree. And I was always a studier and a researcher, even throughout that time, but my interests were very broad. So, and even in college, I loved writing papers. I did well. I had an English professor that said, Cristen, you should enter this essay in the president's writing competition, because I think this is fantastic. And you know what? It was like, but why? It didn't even faze me, and I didn't do it. And I think, oh my gosh. I followed up with her since and thanked her for her encouragement, but never intended for this to happen. It wasn't until graduating and being offered a spot to go for my master's, and I realized, wait a second, I don't want to get locked into an academic or a government position just for other reasons. Long story. This is the abbreviated version. And I thought, okay, you know what? You've always been entrepreneurial. Now's the time. What are you going to do? And the writing thing had always been part of who I am. So that's kind of how that came about. But I don't think you need to know who you are. And I think your passion finds you sometimes, because it's not actually writing that I love. What I love is what writing does.
Yeah.
Writing is just a tool, and I do public speaking. I do all kinds of things, and I work with clients in different ways. So yeah, it's about the mission and what communication, whether it's written, whether it's verbal, whatever it takes to get the message out, let's do that, because we're trying to help people. We're trying to move the conversation forward.
Yeah.
So yeah, kind of my passion kind of caught up with me, or I bumped into it or something.
So your passion is really who you are, and our passion is our story. And
yeah.
I think in the course of the conversation here, you've touched on a couple of really, really important things. And one is, if you don't know exactly what your mission is, don't worry. It's a lifelong discovery for everyone.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, if you go back to your childhood, if you look at it through the right lens, you're going to find some clues.
Mm-hmm.
They're there. And so if you ask yourself, without doing too much rational thinking, what is it you want to do? There will be something there you want to do without trying to justify it. and something powerful comes out of that, I think.
Yeah, and I think if you want to do something, do it, because I've been a competitive age group athlete. I've started several businesses. I started my first business when I was 8. So that was another clue. And I started a snail stand. I purposefully chose not to do a lemonade stand. I did a snail stand. That's a whole nother story. But again, like you said, because when you look back at your childhood, you see clues. And when I look back on that, and it was a failure, as you can imagine. When I look back on that, I go, oh my gosh, that was me exercising just my entrepreneurial marketing brain. It made perfect sense to have a snail stand, but that was me doing something different and testing something different. I said, everyone else has a lemonade stand. Obviously, that's a way to make money, is to have a little stand, right?
Yeah.
But there's too much competition. Everybody has fish tanks that are covered with slime. So what they need are snails. It just turns out nobody wants to buy snails from a dirty little girl who smells like creek water. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, like, I was on the right track in thinking, it was just that the execution maybe was a bit flawed. So I think the more you try and the more you're able to look and kind of laugh at yourself and find the humor in your failures and take those things and move them forward, that everything you do is just a new iteration of something else. And then eventually, if you do enough things and you love what you're doing them for yourself and for, kind of for the right reasons, someday, like, all those things are going to coalesce, and then boom, that's where you can go from there.
Yeah, that's great, Cristen. So art imitates life. That means you have to have some experience to write. So, but that's been turned around and said, and at least one writer I'm thinking of has said that life imitates art more than art imitates life. So that means what? That means that your writing can have an influence.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know that you have already said that what your message is much more than writing. So you're interested, as I am, in social justice causes. And so what can you say about the other aspect of it? And how did you come to that aspect of it? That's another aspect, maybe a deeper aspect of writing.
Yeah, because I definitely started out doing more of the entertainment type stuff, fiction and novels and things like that. And then just as I've allowed myself to just follow what's interesting to me, and you connect with like-minded people, I've just gravitated more and more toward that. Yeah, I think because books are so powerful, we have this opportunity to use them for those things that are meaningful. And, I love the word legacy, because a book, I don't think everybody should write a book, by the way. I think there are too many books on the market, which is weird for somebody who's in the publishing industry to say. But I think regardless, they're one way to get the message out. But what's great about them is, unlike video or public speaking or something that's a little bit more, it can go away faster. A book has the ability to speak to people generations from now. And even if we're a little off track in the way that we think, adding to that conversation, that collective body of knowledge, can be like, oh, okay, they were onto something here, and we're going to use that moving forward. So I think it's just a very powerful thing that we can do that can be something that lives beyond us.
Yeah. So when you had your family time growing up, I have a feeling that some of this message was in that family time, because you're not just reading, you're discussing the books, so you're discussing ideas, and you're probably discussing the value they have to the world from that point.
Yeah, we definitely looked at a bunch of different books. I think in the beginning it was more some of it was morality tales and things like that that my parents would read to us, creating that culture and training us in the way that the worldview that they had, which I think, again, that's where you can use books. That's what books can do for your children. I don't remember discussing books all that much and discussing ideas later. We do that more now, I think, than we did before. And I think what I like about it, or I should say, if we did it before, it didn't stick in my mind, because I think that before, when you're younger, you tend to have the same thoughts and beliefs as your family. So,
yeah,
you know, how much discussion can you really have if you are in complete agreement or all are sharing the same body of knowledge? So as an adult, it's great, because as we've diverged in different ways, we bring new perspectives to conversations and can discuss those books that we read, earlier in life, and ones that we're collectively reading now. So I feel like maybe that was a weird roundabout way of answering that. I might not have answered your question, but
yeah. So there are different ways to develop books. Some people, they talk about plot-driven books versus character-driven books. It seems like you could have one that was predominantly one, but they need both aspects. And a book that is only plot-driven or only character-driven is probably pretty lacking. So I've seen a lot of movies that maybe had a really good actor in it, and maybe they almost carried it, but it's a lousy story. And I'm really disappointed by that, by poor writing in a movie, because when I go, I want to get into some deep issues, and I want to be able to think about them and think about the value of them. And I think that's so the structure of the story is really important.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's told in a really bland way, or if it's told with too much action that's meaningless,
right?
Then you can even take a pretty good story and ruin it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So when you write, how do you think about those two things? The meaning of a story is awfully important.
Yeah, and I think that the good stories are all character driven, because it takes some outside force to kick the ball rolling, otherwise we would just plod along. Yeah. But once you have that outside force that clicks in, if you just keep having these, high drama moments, well, drama is not story. Action is not story. What story is how a person grows, that the character arc, the journey that they take, and the takeaway for the viewer or the reader, like you said in the very beginning, that the story is done when you walk through this thing and you have something to show for it at the end. Mm-hmm. And character, as we as humans react or deal with a certain situation, that it has to be character driven, because I'm going to make a different decision. My husband and I are very different in our approach. So if the same thing happened to either one of us, I would react in one way. He would react in a completely different way. That's character driven. And so what's interesting is, how does this person in this situation, with their personality, their life experience, all of their stuff, how are they reacting and why? And then what's going to happen at the end of that? He and I might actually come to the same conclusion in the end and the same growth. We're going to do it in two totally different ways. So if you're just focusing on the action and all of that, maybe I know some people like that, but to me, that it's not compelling at all. Like you, I want to learn from something and walk away going, the next time I'm in a similar situation, to kind of see myself in that person. And that's where I think that life can imitate art, is when we recognize that the situation we're in, if we can look at it through a lens of an artist, is like, ooh, I'm going to make good choices so that if this was a movie being made about me, I would want to watch it and other people would want to see the outcome.
Yeah. So that's actually very interesting. I think that to write anything or to create anything in on the screen or anywhere, I think you just have to have an idea about what you want to express.
Mm-hmm.
But you're talking about how important the characters are to that. And that, actually, I'm glad I asked you that, because you could say just art imitates life. You could just actually tell a story that you've seen in other people. Or you could even have a little bit a broader psychological understanding of people from some decades of living and from exploration of even, they call it a soft science, but psychological principles. And you could have a framework for that. And you could weave your experience and your framework together to create a character. And hopefully that would be validated by some character you've actually seen also. But what's your approach for getting deeply enough into a character to develop them? Do you have a structure for doing that? Where's your degree in psychology?
Well, it's funny. My degree in anthropology, because anthropology is the study of humans.
Yeah.
And so it brings so many of these things in, sociology and biology and all of these things, that I do use that a lot when I'm looking at character. So two things. One is I don't write fiction myself. So I abandoned that back at that novel. I do like to edit it though. So when I edit it, I look at why this story. I mean, that's really the first thing, is why this story? Because if there's not compelling enough growth, if there's not high stakes, then kind of what's the point? And who is it going to appeal to? So that's kind of the first thing. And this might be relevant. So I do a lot of memoir. And a lot of people come to me and say, oh, you know what, so this happens to me, actually, probably the most I hear from is divorcees. They come to me and they said, I've gone through this terrible divorce. It was really dramatic. It's a crazy story. I want to write this memoir. Great. More than 50% of the population has gone through a divorce. Most of those are nasty. We've all got drama. So what? That's kind of the thing. It's like, but what did you learn? If it's just that you're trying to be dramatic and share the weaknesses of all these things, what's the point? No, it's how these two personalities, the weaknesses of two personalities come together and clash, and then how one person takes that and moves forward and does something better. That's a story. So that's what I'm looking for in those stories, is not the drama, but how the person in the drama reacts to that and uses it to accomplish a specific goal and hopefully to become a better person. Yeah.
Okay. So that answers my question to a point. So you could choose to portray. Okay, so ultimately, maybe we can move in the direction of transcending ego a little bit.
Yes.
And ego, so that's a universal idea.
Mm-hmm.
But ego expresses itself in so many ways, and I don't think we're ever going to be free of struggle. Nope. It would be nice on some level, to be that transcendent, but that's a tall order. So,
but don't you think that ego also, it has a negative thing? But if you don't have an ego, if you don't have a strong ego, I don't think you can get things done.
Now, see there, you got into a psychological definition of what is ego, because it's ego is how the particular writer defines it at the time. So, a strong ego, I think Freud talked about controlling, the id and the
right. Like the shadow self.
No, that's what you're talking about.
Young. That's young. That's right.
You're right. If you don't have a strong ego, you can't get anything done. But if you're using the ego in terms of self-centeredness,
mm-hmm.
then that's a different connotation to the word.
Right.
So yeah. And that's kind of the way I was using it, thinking beyond yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But so you could approach these struggles from an addictive personality, a numb or a tough, numb, non-feeling personality, a detached personality, a super emotional personality, just go on and on. One who is very involved in sensual aspects, or one who is very involved in very, very detached in dreaming, or one who's very, one who's subject to a lot of inertia in their life. So where do you go? How do you develop that? How does your understanding of the various ways that humans can approach life? How do you use that? Well, you don't write very much fiction, you said.
No, but I do edit it. I think the key is, and this translates to life also for ourselves and when we deal with other people, it's you have to identify what is the fatal flaw for that character. Or if we're in a situation, what is going to be my fatal flaw in this situation? So for some of us, it's going to be, for the person who's highly emotional and reactive, their fatal flaw is a lack of objectivity. So that's kind of the pin that you go, okay, at some point, if I'm talking a person through developing the outline for a fiction book or editing it, is like, okay, that's the thing that we need to go for. What is it going to take for that person to have, finally for it to click over and for them to be able to step out of their emotional kind of lizard brain and get objective about themselves and see themselves that way. So on the flip side, for those of us who are, see ourselves as very rational and logical and are uncomfortable with emotion, for us, it's all about the logic. Well, this makes sense, so this is what I'm going to do. And for that character, their fatal flaw could be forgetting that most humans need a little bit more warmth to get them on board with an idea. So a hard driving character is going to have to overcome their logical linear brain to step back and allow the people around them the space to be humans. They're going to have to become a human to move forward and accomplish their goal. So it really is just identifying what that thing is, and then what's it going to take to have that person go, just like you said before, this is the no-go zone. If I don't fix this, I can't get to what's on the other side. So it has to be worth letting that go to bring that wall down.
Yeah. You know what? You just made me think of a movie, Paul Newman's movie, Hombre. Do you remember that?
I have not seen that one.
Oh, you need, well, I can't say you need to, but I think you need to.
No, I'll have to watch it.
What that is a story of someone who was rather abused because he was a half-breed, a Navajo. Mm-hmm. So they actually made Paul Newman look like an Indian. That was a trick in itself. But anyway, so, he's kind of a closed, hard character and very brave, pragmatic, and, he can take care of himself. Mm-hmm. But he meets this woman who's always needling him, kind of pushing his buttons. And he has the greatest amount of respect for her because she is honest and courageous. And she knows, she's centered and knows what she's doing. And at the end of the movie, nobody will sacrifice to go down and save this woman who's being held hostage by a very bad man, Richard Boone. who plays the part wonderfully. But nobody will sacrifice themselves to go down there. And he has no interest in this woman. Mm-hmm. But the other woman, the one that it's actually a subtle love story. It's not a sexual love story, mm-hmm. but it is. She finally gets to him, and he says, "All right, I'm not looking to get myself killed, so do this and that." And he goes down there and gets himself killed because he'd met somebody who was actually honest and courageous, and it cracked the nut.
Right. Yeah, and his moral compass, that was the thing. The morality that he had developed was a stronger force than the danger, than the fear.
And all the other characters around him were hypocrites, and he wouldn't do a thing for them. Mm-hmm. So,
and I tell a lot of writers, I think that novelists especially should look to screenwriters for a lot of how we develop stories. The way that screenwriters develop stories and the way that Hollywood teaches writers to write is so good. It's just so good. And I use a lot of screenwriting principles when I talk to authors and coach them and edit their books, because it's so simple. It's not easy, but it's simple.
Yeah. So I think it tends to be that if you have a strong personality in one area, you might be weak in another. And that's kind of what you just highlighted there. And so if we were to generalize, we're talking about human stories and strengths in one area and weakness in another, and the need to grow and learn. So I'm going to let you just generalize and give a word to our listeners who aren't interested in being writers themselves. What can they do with their own story to develop it better? You've answered that.
Yeah. I mean, if we're talking about just as humans, your story as a human, I think seeing yourself as a hero and saying, what would a hero do in this situation? You know, if you're frustrated because you're pitching to all of these agents or whatever, and you keep being rejected, see yourself as if you were in a movie. What would the hero do? Would they get frustrated and give up? No, they would not. They would just keep going. Yeah. Whatever that is. So on a personal level, doing it that way. For developing a novel or a book, I think it really is choose a story that's really worth telling. The stakes have to be extremely high, and the character has to have some flaw that if they don't overcome it, they will not achieve the goal that they want. And then they're going to have ups and downs along the way, but there should be this rising character growth. And then they have to come to a moment of crisis where this is the biggest thing they've ever faced. And now it's either quit or throw it all in, do or die. And, you know, they overcome. And like you said, not all stories, just because a hero overcomes something doesn't mean they live to tell the tale. Failure is always an option as far as getting the thing that's desired, but it's overcoming the flaw that's the real story. Yeah. So make sure you have all of those pieces, because if you don't, you're going to wander around and never tell a compelling story.
All right. Well, Cristen, that's been an awesome interview. And I would like you to be able to tell us, how do you work with writers? If a writer is interested in working with you, what would you like them to know about you?
Sure. Well, they can go to my website and just kind of get a feel for, you know, the different things I do. But I work developmentally, helping them after they've written a full manuscript to tell them where the flaws are, how to move things around to make it stronger and tighter. And I also help them develop manuscripts on the coaching consulting side. They can learn a lot. Just my website has a lot of blog posts and things that I try to give some really great guidance. My YouTube channel is I'm putting more and more videos there, so they can certainly do that. And they can always email me through my website. And if there are questions I can answer, I'm more than happy to do that. I love to get people on the right path, because what I find is that a lot of times what people want. They don't realize that certain steps that they take in the very beginning can actually determines how they end up. So if they want to follow, I specialize in authors who desire to be traditionally published. So if somebody's watching and that's their goal, please talk to me first before you do anything else, because there are things that if you do them now, you will hinder that process later. So, but my website is CristenIris.com.
All right. Well, Cristen, I see that we do have another participant here.
Great.
So I'm going to say, I believe this is Lori or Laura. If you have a question, you can go down to the bottom of your screen there and go ahead and type it into chat. Or here, let me see. Attendees. I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk. Lori, if you'd like to say anything, go ahead and unmute yourself. And if you'd like to ask any questions, Cristen is here for you.
Well, hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, I can.
Hey, Lori.
Hi, how are you? I know Cristen very well. As a matter of fact, I hired Cristen to edit my second book, The Business of Being Sole Purpose in and Out of the Workplace. I tried to join this early on and it was the wrong code. And then I happened to be out on Twitter, saw the updated code, got in as quickly as I could, which was unfortunately probably a little bit more than halfway into this, but I just wanted to, watch and listen and see what was going on.
Well, thank you, Lori. I always appreciate your support, and I'm delighted to introduce you to Scott, another one of my clients. So,
okay.
Yeah, and I will. Let me say this, and for anybody who watches this in the replay, if you're a writer, what I think the best thing you can do is find a hero that is in the writing space doing what you're doing. So Lori is somebody that I point people to a lot. She is great on social media platforms. She speaks. She does all these things. And if you want to know what it takes to be successful in your space, and you have to do what successful people do. So Lori is a great role model. So Lori, I'm so glad that you are in and Scott introduced you, because I think it's important to have role models. We could maybe equate heroes to role models in that way.
Thank you.
All right, very good. So Laura, you're an author of how many books?
2 so far, and then I'm working on right now the second book. Well, my first 2 books are nonfiction, and I was told at a writing conference that once you're in a genre, you must stay in that genre, and that was the line in the sand for me, and I decided to put my toe over that. And I wrote the first book of a series of 3, and She Writes Press picked that up. That comes out in August of 2020. And I'm working on the second book in that series now, and it's a suspense thriller. So yes, you can cross the line. If someone says you can't, oh, by golly, you sure can.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's great.
If she heard that part earlier, we were talking about that you don't have to know exactly what you want to do. You just try new things as challenges and opportunities present. So that's
I wish I had heard that. I will listen to it again once you put it out on YouTube so that I can see and hear the whole thing.
Great. Yeah, it'll be out there, and I'll give the file to Cristen. And if you would like to follow these interviews, you could join the Aware Athlete group on Facebook if you'd like to do that.
I will. Thank you for the invitation. Aware Athlete. I'm writing it down right now.
The Aware Athlete group. Yeah.
Okay.
It has a mountaintop for a logo.
Okay.
Yeah, and so you can tell us a little bit more about your books after you join the group, or give me some personal messages about them. I'd like to hear more about them.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So, Cristen, I want to thank you again.
Well, thank you, Scott. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. I think it was an awesome interview. You had great answers. And so what we're going to do here is